Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we're up to Symphony number 85, La Reine, the Queen. In other words, the Queen of France. The full title was La Reine de France. And it was a title that actually originated in the 18th century, which is very rare for Haydn symphonies with titles. Most of them he had nothing to do with and was completely unaware of. But this one was a particular favorite of La Reine Marie Antoinette. Oh, yes, soon to be beheaded. Actually only a few years later. It's rather astonishing. Haydn was not a revolutionary, and it was probably pretty horrified, especially since the Queen liked his symphony a lot. But, this symphony, which is one of the very greatest of all of, they're all great, but this one is like really, really great. It's one of the largest of the Paris symphonies. That, with all of its repeats intact, it would probably last a bit longer than half an hour normally, which is really big. I mean, that's serious time. And beyond that, it sits at the center of a lot of the sort of mythology of Haydn reception that has, I think, that in the 19th century anyway, did a lot of damage to his reputation. Why? Because there was this picture of Haydn as Papa Haydn, the nice old, entertainer and purveyor of effete musical frippery to the ancien régime. You know what I mean? He was considered to be a collaborator, a member of the old guard, old-fashioned, all of those things. And nothing could be further than the truth, and nothing could be more radical than this symphony. In fact, it's so forward-thinking and so unusual structurally that I really believe it's only been in the past couple of decades that people have started to come to grips with it. I mean, how to perform it. And we'll talk about that very shortly, because the first movement has a structure which is just unbelievably, uniquely fascinating. And there may be no real answer to the way Haydn plotted this whole thing through. One definitive answer anyway. I mean, it's really, really, really a remarkable piece. I just love it. I love it to death. So we've got examples from the Austro-Hungarian orchestra, the Austro-Hungarian Haydn Orchestra, which is a pickup ensemble, under Adam Fischer on Nimbus. It's very good performances. His Paris symphonies are marvelous. It's one of the high points of his cycle, to be honest with you. The symphony's in B-flat major, in case you were wondering. And here's the thing. Where does the exposition of the first movement really, really start? You see, normally there's a certain notation. I can show you that, but you don't have to see it. I just tell you, when the exposition putters along, and when it gets to the end, you reach what's called the double bar. The double bar is simply two lines, go down the page like this, with a colon in front of each system, basically. And what that tells you is to go back and start the exposition over again if you wish to take the repeat, because it's identical. So where do you go back to? Well, you go back to the other double bar, which is the beginning of the exposition, which has two lines running down the page with little colons, and it's like quotation marks, and you just do what's in that frame. But here is the thing. This symphony begins with an adagio introduction, and that introduction leads to the typical allegro, the quicker part. And the quicker part is where the double bar would be to start the exposition. It's not there. It does not exist. Now, performances since time immemorial have assumed that the double bar at the end of the exposition means go back to the beginning of the allegro part. And that's what everybody does. That's what this performance does. That's what Bernstein does. That's what all the great Haydn interpreters do. However, Nicholas Harnoncourt noticed, and some others, that there is no double bar at the beginning. What that would mean is go back to the very beginning of the symphony and start from the very first note, including that introduction. And there's a very good reason for doing that, because Haydn has integrated the introduction into the whole symphony, first of all, but also significantly into this first movement. And I'm going to show you how he does it. And so I happen to be a fan of going all the way back to the beginning. I really think you should, because it hammers home the basic motives of the symphony that Haydn's going to be working with, both in the first movement and within the symphony as a whole. And often when Haydn has several motives and things that he's going to be employing over a span of movements, the balance of them is interesting. He'll emphasize one more and than the other, and use one more in the opening movements and one more in the later movements. It's all very, very skillfully deployed so that A, you never get bored, and B, you can follow exactly what's going on, and C, you recognize all these common things when you hear them. It's all just genius, screaming, flaming genius. And, this business about Haydn being this, jolly old, sort of, fan of the monarchy. I mean, they took very good care of him. If I were in his shoes, I'd have been a fan of the monarchy too. He did really, really, really well. And they also took very good care of Beethoven, who was an anti-monarchist, and they still took very good care of him. So, there was something to be said for, enlightened monarchs in the 18th century, even if you disagree with the political system generally. And I do, by the way. I think, birthright superiority is a revolting concept. But, I wasn't there, and you had to make do with what you had back in the day. Anyway, the bottom line is that they appreciated music that was radical, that was avant-garde, if you want to call it that was new and inventive. And, the idea that this is somehow old and fusty and creaky, and that Mozart and Beethoven were better. Mozart because he never got along with anybody and died young, and Beethoven because he was forced the aristocracy to support his singular genius, which they recognized even if they didn't understand it always. That's all nonsense. Haydn is being penalized for being successful. That's the bottom line. But he wasn't just popular with the aristocracy. He was popular with everybody. And this isn't, there are other ways that we can show this, actually, in the context of the symphony. And we'll talk about that when we get to the second movement. But for now, this first movement is just a powerhouse of musical invention. It is extraordinary. I mean, extraordinary. So let's listen to the introduction. And there are two elements that you need to really pay attention to. One is the opening rhythm. Da-da. That's it. Then it goes ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba. It's that rhythm, short, long. Dum-dum. That is the rhythm that is going to characterize just about everything in the symphony, one way or another. Now, there are many ways you can characterize using a short, long rhythm because it's very basic, isn't it? You can accent the first note, dum-bum, dum-bum, or the second one, dum-dum, which is what he does initially. And that's one thing that you will hear throughout the symphony. So because that's going to be coming back throughout the symphony, you'll see it gradually achieves greater and greater and greater prominence, reminding us of the introduction. But he doesn't want to hit us over the head with a sledgehammer in the first movement particularly. It's there, but not so crazily. The other idea, which is very present in the first movement, is this rushing string thing. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, bum, 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, bum, 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 ba-da-da-da. You hear it 3 times. And you will hear exactly that thing, this uprushing string thing, as a thrice repeated motive in the exposition of the first movement. So that binds the introduction to the first movement thematically. And, all of that sort of argues in favor of taking Haydn literally and not regarding as an oversight the fact that you don't find that repeat sign at the beginning of the quick part only, that you really should go back and play the introduction again, particularly as you'll see when that very, very fundamental idea becomes more and more prominent as the symphony goes on. So it's good that you get it into your head. All of this is practical. There will be people who want to make a huge point about it. Well, the whole structure of the first movement falls apart unless we take the repeat here. No, it's not like that. Music doesn't really operate that way. People can get as passionate as they want, but the practical fact is that it all depends on how you hear it and how well you remember things and what feels right to you while you're listening. I mean, that's really what the bottom line is. There's no, like I said, no right or wrong answer. But the literal text tells us to go back to the beginning of the symphony and play the introduction again, which is extremely rare. I mean, it's so rare. There is from the Romantic era, a very similar and interesting case of that, which is the opening of Chopin's Second Piano Sonata, which you may recall has that sort of piano opening bars, bum, ba, bum, ba-da-dum, bum. Then it goes bum, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da. Remember that? From the Chopin Second Piano Sonata? Most people go back to the boom, chicka, boom, chicka, and don't play the introductory bars. But some people do, because it's ambiguous as to what Chopin actually wanted. The convention to start at the quick part and just, put that allegro section only in brackets is so strong. But it's worth remembering it wasn't so strong back in the 18th and early 19th centuries. And we should give Haydn a little credit for not following conventions that he never even knew existed at the time that he was writing the works in question, right? So let's listen to the introduction, right? We have to do that. We've been talking for a while already, but there's a lot to talk about in this symphony, and I have 11 musical examples, I think. There's a lot to listen to. So here we go, the introduction. So you heard that, right? Ta-ta, short, long, and then the scale thing, like that. Now, one thing to note is that the form of this introduction is what's called a French overture. A French overture, as opposed to an Italian sinfonia or something else, was all of Handel's overtures are French. They're all French overtures. It's a short march in jerky dotted rhythms, dotted meaning dum, ba-dum, like that, followed by a fast, usually contrapuntal part. But this is just the march part. You could argue that the allegro is actually the fast part of the French overture, that the whole movement is a French overture. It's an interesting theory that you could possibly make a very good case for. But in any event, the French audience would have been most gratified that Haydn had done this for them. Maybe not Marie Antoinette, because remember, she was Austrian. So, she was the sister of the emperor in Vienna. So, anyway, so I want to play you for just a minute, just so you get it also into your head, the uprushing string business as it occurs in the overture, and then as it will occur in the exposition, or the motion music in the exposition of the first movement. So here's that little bit, just so that you can hear the identity. It's obvious, but I want you to hear it nonetheless. So here's what's going to happen now once we get to the allegro bit of the first movement. The bits of the overture, the introduction, that Haydn is going to reuse in the allegro occur in the motion music sections. The other bits are original to this movement, but not exactly 100%. Why? Well, because it's a monothematic movement. I mean, it's really super duper monothematic. That means the first and the second subjects, not only in this case derive from the same material, but they're the same. They're absolutely the same. The only difference is that the first subject is played by the strings, and the second subject, the upper line, is played by the oboe. That's it. But it's the same music both times. And not only that, but that first subject is repeated. So, in a counter statement before the formal motion music gets going. So you hear it a lot. And it consists of two parts. You hear it a lot because it's a contrapuntal subject. You have an up in a top line. Pardon me. Let me get my there. A top line, which is yeah da da da, like that, and underneath you have dum bum 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 bum, and these occur simultaneously. So it's a bipartite theme with a top part and a bottom part, and they're equally important. In fact, you could argue that the bottom part is even more important. Now, you may notice something about the top part. Yeah, da, da, da. It's a long short as opposed to a short long. It's the basic motive of the symphony. It's just reversed. Haydn is playing a little sly joke on us by doing it that way. But what's more important is this dum bum 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 bum. It's so delicate. And this entire movement is a fascinating essay in the difference between music that moves and music which is still, between contrasting motion within a fixed tempo. It's marked like conspirito, or I don't know, it's like vivace. It's just vivacious. But there are moments which are very, very still and moments which move like the dickens. And it's all in the same tempo. It's fascinating how Haydn controls time in this particular movement. It's the symphony on the edge of forever, if you're a Trekkie. I mean, time is being manipulated, our sense of time. But here's the really cool thing. The music leading into the second subject is a quotation, which Haydn doesn't do that often. It's a quotation, which we've heard before, by the way. He's quoted this a few times, of his Farewell Symphony, which was enormously popular in Haydn's day, and it was well known in France. We know that. We know that because there was correspondence between a French cellist and somebody in Russia. They knew this symphony in France about sending the music there and whatnot. So Haydn's symphonies were circulating. And evidently the Farewell was kind of a popular one. And believe it or not, that little counterpoint, chung, 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 is a variant of the opening of the Farewell Symphony. And Haydn makes it clear by playing the actual opening of the Farewell Symphony as an introduction to the second subject, which is the same as the first subject. So you see why I say this is an incredibly rich piece. It's complex in the sense that the relationships between things are really extraordinarily cleverly and brilliantly worked out by Haydn. So I'm going to play you the Farewell Symphony part as it evaporates into the second subject on the oboe with the bum bum bum, the Farewell Symphony part in its harmless form as the counterpoint to the first subject, and you'll hear exactly what I mean. So here is the motion music leading into the second subject, the Farewell Symphony becoming Symphony number 85 in B flat major. Here you go. Whoa, right? Isn't that something else? So there's that aspect of it. Now, you may have noticed I said this is a monothematic movement. It is. It's all based on that opening idea, the da 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 da, the junk 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 junk, and the music from the introduction, which would make it not less than monothematic, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, there is no technical terminology, quite frankly, for what Haydn is doing here. It's all original. There's nothing like it. It's sui generis. There's nothing like it in the symphonic repertoire, and so we go into that. And finally, the last thing I want to play was just the very end of the exposition, where you hear the short long motive restored, very briefly. It's repeated 2 or 3 times as a chump chung chump chung chump chung, like that, to bring the exposition to a close and integrate the music of the introduction fully into the ongoing discourse of the vivace section of the first movement. So here's that ending bit. Okay, and we're all just in the exposition. That's the thing, right? Then we have what we call a development section, and then what we call a recapitulation. It's not long, but do you see how much is happening in such a short span of time? It's actually a very brief exposition. I mean, it really is. It's one of Haydn's shorter ones because it's all based on this one tune and idea. But you heard, especially after the farewell thing, the uprushing string thing came back, and then the second subject, and then that ending with the jump job. It's unbelievably, fabulously, fascinatingly put together. And the more you listen to it, the more interesting it becomes. So let me play you the entire exposition, because I see we've already gone 20 minutes and we haven't even heard the full exposition. That's something. But I hope you could just get excited like I do from this. This is the real deal. This is what symphony writing is about. It's what development is about. It's this range of motion and movement, this range of expression and tonality and harmony. It's unbelievable. So here is the full exposition. That is the full exposition without the introduction, which may actually be part of the exposition. So we have to stop with the first movement, and you still have to listen to the rest of it, because it's amazing what Haydn's going to do with all of this material. It really is. It's incredibly gripping and very expressive. And there's a heartfelt lyricism, a delicacy, an intimacy to some of this music, even though the range between, loud and soft and fast and slow is tremendous. But there's something really exquisite about the craft that goes into this. It's like a Fabergé egg. It's just beautiful. All the details are just unbelievably, exquisitely touched in. So that's the first movement. Go and listen to it about 100 times. Trust me, it will never bore you. Anyway, the second movement is a theme and variations. Now, we come back to Marie Antoinette. This was supposedly the movement that she particularly liked because it's based on supposedly a French folk song called La Gentille et Jeune Lisette. There is no hard evidence that there ever was such a folk theme. In fact, it's possible that Haydn wrote the tune and words were set to it later, to Haydn's tune. Very much has happened, for example, in Dvorak's New World Symphony, where the, quote, spiritual Going Home was actually set to Dvorak's melody, which was totally original. And the words came later, and then it was reinterpreted as a Negro spiritual, which it actually is not. And so Haydn was a master at writing these quasi-folk-like themes. And this is one of those pieces. The theme is a typical, AABB form, but the theme itself, the melody, is actually ABA. So the way you hear it is AA and then BABA is how it shakes down in most of the variations, not all of them, but most of them. I'm going to play you the actual melody so you get a sense of it. It's very catchy. And notice that it's a short long. It's actually dun bum ba da 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 da. So it's yum bum ba. All he has to do is add one extra short note so that you have two instead of one. But it's the same idea, right? I mean, who are we kidding? It's dun da. Yeah. The basic motive from which the symphony derives. Another reason to believe, actually, that Haydn quite possibly invented the tune himself or a version of it. So here's the theme. Now, most of these variations are very straightforward. Haydn does not disguise the melody very much. He just decorates it in various ways. But there are a couple of variations. There's one particularly in the middle that's fabulously exotic, slinky and sexy in a way that neither Mozart nor Beethoven really ever are. This is really Haydn. Haydn was in his way, an ethnomusicologist. I mean, he grew up in Hungary and he knew all of these sort of folk melodies and harmonies, and he inserts them gently into his pieces. He was famous for the Hungarian rondos, the end of his D major piano concerto, the one that still gets played, or the Gypsy rondo in one of his piano trios. These are all things that appealed to people back in the day, just as the Brahms Hungarian dances appeal to us, or the Dvorak Slavonic dances. Haydn was way ahead of his time in that respect, almost a romantic nationalist in some respects. But here is a variation which has just the most wonderful, exotic harmony. I mean, listening to it in the 18th century, his audiences must have just heard it and been transported. And so are we. Let's transport. So here is the exotic variation from the second movement. You may also note that some of the variations employ the dotted rhythm from the introduction. That is, ba-bum, ba-bum, bum-bum. It's very easy to turn that yum, bum, ba, ya, da, 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 into yum, bum, ba, dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, 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 ba, da, 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 etc. And so Haydn does. I mean, he's like, yeah, sure, we can do it that way. That's fine. So you get some of that as well from the introduction. And in that way, you'd think that with found material, it would be difficult for Haydn to sort of integrate it into the overall syntax that he's evolved for the symphony. But no, not a bit. Fits perfectly. And it's just a lovely, charming movement with an incredibly catchy tune that you get to hear many times. There's also a fabulous variation after this exotic one that has a delicious flute solo. Really just lovely. I mean, orchestral flutists must just love to play that. I mean, it's so grateful. It sounds marvelous. Now, we come to the minuet. The minuet is based entirely on the long-short idea, but not on the same note. It's not dun-dun, it's bwomp, 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 like that. But it's short, long. I said long, short, but it's short, long. And that's all you need to know. That's all you need to know about it. But you will see that Haydn, so it's not quite all you need to know. You'll see further that the short, long idea, which only appeared really briefly at the end of the exposition in the first movement, other than that introduction, is becoming more and more prominent. And it's quite prominent here in the minuet, a version of it. And again, it's done in such a way that you may be conscious of that fact, you may not. But it doesn't matter because that's what it is. Here's the entire minuet first section. That's all you need to hear of it. It's a delightful movement with this catchy tune. My goodness, here it is. But like everything in this symphony, there are moments, it's a beefy sounding tune, but it alternates with passages of great warmth and intimacy and delicacy. I mean, it's a recurring idea also throughout this symphony. You certainly heard it in the second movement. This idea of movement and stasis, of calm, intimate communion, and big, beefy, bold assertiveness. Those aren't things, again, that you can sort of point to as like, thematic analyses and say, oh, well, there you go. No, it doesn't work that way. But it's also something that unifies the symphony. It really is that kind of music, that kind of listening that the music encourages us to indulge in as we get through it. So at last we come to the finale. Well, there you go. I mean, the very opening notes. It's a short, long fiesta. It is the apotheosis of the short, long motive. I'm going to play you the whole exposition, but there are a couple other bits I want you to hear. One of them comes from the development section, but this movement is a sonata rondo. What is a sonata rondo? Okay, well, first of all, it's a monothematic sonata rondo. Oh, I know. The terminology just piles up, doesn't it? And it sounds complicated, but it really isn't. What happens is you have this opening tune that's lovely, and it's like a rondo theme. That is, rondos are A, B, A, C, A, D, A. They go on forever. But in classical forms, it's usually A, B, A, C, A, or A, B, A, C, A, D, A, something like that. But in a sonata rondo, what happens is the second subject is the first rondo episode. You have rondo theme, episode 1, which is motion music, and then really the second subject. Then you go back to the opening rondo theme, the ritornello. Then you have a big development section, which is the C section. And then you go back to the rondo theme, and then there's like a coda that wraps everything up. That's what happens here. That's exactly what happens here. But because that opening has the short, long motive so prominently, I mean, it's all over the place. And you also hear, remember the end of the exposition of the first movement? Jump, 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 da da jump, like that. At the end of the first movement, where you had that short, long motive, well, it comes back. It comes back in the development section. And I want you to hear that bit leading to the return of the rondo, because it's Haydn celebrating the relationship of this music to the introduction that we heard half an hour previously almost. So just let me play that bit of the development. It's really, really, really powerful moment. Here it is. I mean, in a way, that idea, short, long, is not developed with any rigor in the first movement at all. Haydn has saved it for here. So in a sense, this is almost a development section for the whole symphony. It's not terribly long, but I mean, he's saved this moment for this movement, which is absolutely delightful. So there's that, which relates back to the beginning. And now I'm going to play you the whole exposition. Oh, my goodness. It makes me sweat. This music is so great. And I feel so inadequate to describe it. It just has to be heard. You have to listen to it many times and live with it in order to, enjoy it to the max. I mean, you can get it the first time you hear it, of course. But the more you listen, the more it gives you. Anyway, here is the exposition of the finale. And then, yes. And then we come to the end. The end where we've been talking about Haydn with his signature ending of 3 repeated chords. Chunk, 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 like that. We get them here too. This is the third of the 6 parasymphonies that employs that ending. Number 86 will not, but we'll see what happens. 87 is a surprise. No, seriously. This is the third time that Haydn's used that characteristic 3 repeated chord ending, and it will return many, many, many times in the symphonies to come. So here is the last repeat of the main theme of the rondo and the exuberant wrap-up. Now, there is a lot more we could talk about in this symphony. There are a lot of other things going on, all of which are very easy to hear and are just, painfully brilliant. But I think that gives you a sense of what you will encounter if you give this symphony a little time, a little attention. Just relax, open yourself up and let it take it all in, take in the panorama. It is an entirely new and fresh take on symphonic form, on the symphony. And like I said, its modernity never ceases to amaze me, because this is music that has not a whiff of the old about it. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.